the Senate blocked a bill that would have created this commission. So I'll issue an executive order that will allow us to go forward, because I refuse to pass this problem on to another generation of Americans. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress. I can. Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And believe me, right now dealing with Congress, the idea but believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting.
We are not just going to be waiting for legislation in order to make sure that we're providing Americans the kind of help that they need. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward.
Well, it's a bill that has received very little attention but may make free speech a felony and seriously restrict your right to political protest. Just signed into law by the president, H.R. 347 gives federal agents sweeping powers to arrest and bring felony charges against citizens engaged in protests where the Secret Service is present. Joining us now with more, Fox News senior judicial analyst, good friend, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, the thing that jumps out off the page, felony?
Yeah, felony means more than a year in jail. This is not like a traffic ticket. For standing and protesting, the type of thing that for 230 years Americans took for granted because it was protected by the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, has actually been abridged by legislation the president signed last Thursday, supported overwhelmingly by both parties, with very, very little public debate and very little debate in Congress. Basically allows Secret Service agents to decide where there are no free speech zones, not speech zones, no free speech zones. And anybody by the Secret Service can, protected by the Secret Service, can ask those agents to ban protests wherever they are. So I can think of 3 violations: speech violations, association violations, the right to petition the government for a redress of your grievances. What good is free speech if the people in the government are so far away from you that they can't hear you?
Judge, what about keeping our elected officials safe?
Keeping our elected officials safe is entirely different from insulating them from protest. The fact that the president is going to a hotel up the block should not bar you from standing across the street with a sign or with a bullhorn saying what you think about the president's policies. That is not a threat to him, and it is a part of American history since day one that we have the right to speak freely to, about, and against those in the government.
Judge, do you think this is going to be one of those laws that is on the books but not enforced?
I think it's one of those laws that's going to be enforced when the government wants it enforced. The problem, Eric, is it puts a lot of unbridled discretion in the hands of Secret Service agents who may very well say, you know what, boss, you've had a rough day. We'll keep everybody away from you. Or, you know what, boss, this crowd likes you, so we're going to let them, we're going to let you hear them. That's suppressing speech on the basis of its content. And that has been expressly prohibited by the First Amendment since day one.
What dictates the Secret Service is present? In other words, aren't they present all over Washington, D.C.?
Well, they are, and that's a great question, because this law also allows the president to give Secret Service protection to whoever he wants. I'll give you a bizarre example. His campaign managers are coming to Washington to confer with him about the campaign. He can give them Secret Service protection. And then the Secret Service can say to the kids in the streets, you can't shout at David Axelrod, because the campaign manager, because the Secret Service is protecting him. This is a slow, creeping destruction of some of our basic liberties, and the president signed it in secret.
And now some of the Secret Service are going to be providing services for the candidates now as well, right?
Correct.
So
correct.
People aren't going to be able to have their opinion about the candidates?
If the Secret Service so declares, you won't be able to shout at them.
Judge, got to go.
Late November of last year, Yemen elected a new president. Today, a new executive order from President Obama is designed to make sure that Yemen makes a peaceful transition. But is this a case of the U.S. government propping up a dictator? Ben has the reality check you won't see anywhere else.
Well, President Obama issued an executive order today giving the Treasury Department authority to freeze the assets and the money of anyone who gets in the way of the political transition in Yemen. So here's the backstory. Late last year, Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh signed a deal to hand over power to his deputy in return for immunity from prosecution. Now, that move meant that Abu Mansur Hadi became president after a transitional election. Hadi will now lead a 2-year transitional government tasked with amending the Constitution and holding parliamentary elections. Now, the only problem with all of this is that while the U.S. is backing the new president, Hadi, many people in Yemen and across the West are not. And the election that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton congratulated Hadi on winning, well, he was the only candidate. Since the election, the Obama administration has been propping up Hadi with large amounts of money and military assistance. Yes, we now have U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen in an advisory role. So what was today's executive order really about? Well, it grants the Treasury Department authority to freeze the U.S.-based assets of anyone who obstructs implementation of the administration-backed political transition in Yemen. And what makes it even more unusual is that administration officials say it targets the assets of U.S. citizens who engage in activity deemed to threaten Yemen's security or political stability. Now, does that mean Americans or those who have assets in America and call for elections with more than one person on the ballot are a threat to Yemen's political stability? Under this order, it would appear so. Also, the decision to freeze those assets is left up to the sole discretion of the Treasury Secretary and the Secretary of State. Another big question here, though, has this happened before? And the answer is yes. President Obama issued a similar executive order for Somalia in 2009. The other one precedent in 2006, President George W. Bush issued a similar order regarding Ivory Coast in West Africa. So here's what you need to know. The step taken by this executive order really is extraordinary. For the U.S. to support a one-person election in Yemen and then put our troops on the ground there to advise. Meanwhile, we talk about the importance of free speech and protest in our democracy, all the while at the same time yelling about unfair elections in Russia. It all seems to ring so very loudly of hypocrisy. And that is Reality Check.
If you'd like to make your voice heard on this story, head over to Ben's Facebook page. You can find it by searching Ben Swan, WXIX.
President Barack Obama will sign an order banning federal government contractors from discriminating against gay and transgender workers, officials have said. The executive order follows years of pressure from gay rights groups to act. Mr. Obama cannot extend the protection to all American workers, however. The order comes after far broader anti-discrimination legislation has stalled in the Republican-led House of Representatives. The executive order will apply only to federal contractors, which employ nearly 1/4 of the U.S. workforce. This is a major step forward in the struggle for freedom and justice for lesbian, gay, transgender and queer workers and their families. Rhea Carey, Executive Director of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, said in a statement, "Now millions of people will have the economic security they need to provide for their families." Overwhelming support. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act, ENDA, passed the Democratic-controlled U.S. Senate but has since languished in the House amid ongoing partisan political gridlock. That legislation would bar employers with 15 or more workers from making employment decisions, hiring, firing or compensation. based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Mr. Obama urged the House of Representatives to pass the bill in November, saying it had the overwhelming support of the American people, including a majority of Republican voters, as well as many corporations, small businesses and faith communities. One party in one house of Congress should not stand in the way of millions of Americans who want to go to work each day and simply be judged by the job they do, he added, addressing House Republicans. But Republican House Speaker John Boehner has opposed the bill, arguing it could lead to lawsuits and hinder job creation. Mr. Obama has utilized the power of the executive order before, once raising the minimum wage for federal contractors and also expanding the number of workers eligible for overtime pay. There is currently no word on when Mr. Obama plans to sign the order, but a White House official told U.S. media the president had asked his staff to prepare the action for his signature.
This is Dabu 7, August 29, 2013, and this morning the Obama administration has unexpectedly announced 2 new gun control measures, one including a ban on the import of military surplus weapons, which all of you collectors out there that like to collect all these weapons, you're no longer going to be able to do this. This is his way of stopping these guns from getting to the streets, he says. Now, it used to be that you could get away with doing this with U.S. allies. Private entities could, purchase any weapon they wanted. Now, they are looking to stop that 100%. So, with all of the distractions taking place around the world, he comes out of left field and comes with these 2 executive actions to add to the list. And he is also proposing a federal rule to stop those who would be ineligible to pass a background check from skirting the law by registering your gun to a corporation or a trust. So he's looking to close that loophole as well. So those are the 2 new executive actions that he has put into place as of today. But also at the same time, Harvard has a new gun study that just came out and is very interesting because it shows from looking at several European countries that higher gun ownership often leads to lower murder rates. It says, in fact, the murder rates in Russia are 4 times higher than that in the gun-ridden United States. And it found no evidence to suggest that the availability of guns contributes to higher murder rates anywhere in the world. So those are some interesting statements right there from a study out of Harvard. I will leave links as always. Till next time, this has been Dabu 7. Eyes open.
It happened, ladies and gentlemen. President Obama on Saturday, December 31st, 2011, as a little New Year's present to our constitutional republic, signed the National Defense Authorization Act. And he had an accompanying signing statement saying, don't worry, even though it says we can secretly arrest U.S. citizens and throw away the key, we won't be implementing it this way. Of course, he could always change his mind, because here's the big lie. It was President Obama, Senator Carl Levin, of his own party. It was Senator Carl Levin who came out and pointed out, when he was getting the blame for this, that it was President Obama and his lawyers, and he produced the letter, that demanded and said that they would veto the National Defense Authorization Act and hold up the entire military appropriations if they didn't give Obama, the office of the presidency, the power to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens. But it goes further. There's all these creepy clips we've got on Infowars.com from C-SPAN of the authors and sponsors of it. Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator John McCain, Senator Carl Levin, Senator Joe Lieberman, and others saying, yeah, we're going to arrest citizens. Yeah, we're going to torture you. We want you to be afraid. You bet this is for U.S. citizens. That was back when CNN and other mainstream media deceivers were saying, it doesn't affect citizens, it doesn't affect citizens. That was so we couldn't get any opposition to it in the first month of it being developed they would just deny over and over again that it affected citizens. But Ron Paul, myself, and others brought forward the fact that the subsections did say that, and we pointed out the video clips of the authors of it admitting it. But just this last week, CBS News, ABC News, the New York Times, hundreds of publications and TV channels came out and said Ron Paul is crazy. He believes that the NDAA affects citizens and allows the military to operate domestically. Well, the ACLU's done the analysis. It's a worldwide declaration of the entire planet as a battlefield, a worldwide declaration of war by the corporate interests that run our military and our government that have hijacked it. It allows the torture, secret arrest, indefinite detention forever of U.S. citizens. That's all on record. And there's been deception after deception. Remember, a month and a half ago, oh, it doesn't affect citizens. That big controversy. Then the senators that authored it said, you bet it does. I'm going to show you where you can find those clips here in just a moment. Then Obama, lies within lies, came out and said, I'm opposing this bill. And then it freaked everybody out when he said, no, now I'm going to sign it. And it freaked people out even more when the senators came out, all of them, and said, don't blame us. We were told by the White House, do this or I won't sign it. Now Obama in his signing statement, you can just type NDAA into Google News and you'll find it. It's on whitehouse.gov. He said today in his signing statement that he doesn't like the indefinite detention part for citizens, but the Senate wanted it, so that's what they got, but that he's going to disregard that because he didn't want to hold up military appropriations, when he was the one that said he would hold it up if they didn't. I mean, this is why the deception is so hard to pierce for the general public, who kind of just halfway pays attention to the headlines. And the media propaganda is targeting those of you out there that really don't pay attention. Remember the Patriot Act? They said that wouldn't affect citizens and was only for terrorists. Now they use it in family violence cases and cases of people dealing marijuana thousands of times per state per year. Remember how they weren't going to spy on us without warrants. Now they just admit they are. Now the TSA's announced they're going to be at checkpoints all over the country, and they're actually running the checkpoints as we speak. This is a total takeover by criminal interests that have seized our nation, and they need to put this police state grid in place to maintain and protect themselves from the public. The criminals need a tyranny in place so they can continue to get away with all the crimes they've committed. Now let me just briefly show you the facts right here. Number one, you've got the ACLU. This is just out today, December 31st, 2011, just a few hours ago. President Obama signs indefinite detention bill into law. And what do they say about it? They say clearly he has disgraced himself. You can read it right here. It says today is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without charge or trial into law. And this is worldwide. And some said, oh, this isn't for citizens. Really, Obama's been killing U.S. citizens without a trial and setting the precedent and saying, oh, well, they're terrorists. But remember, the domestic Homeland Security documents we've gotten clearly states that the main focus is good old boys, conservatives, libertarians, gun owners, farmers, Amish. That's who the system's targeting. Now, here's Infowars.com. Obama administration demanded power to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens. Just type that in and you'll get this video with Carl Levin where he says, hey, during the debate, don't be blaming us for what happened. Are you aware that the White House demanded that we add the provision that it be U.S. citizens, and it does affect U.S. citizens? And then we've got all these countless other articles that have got the videos of the other senators in there getting super, super creepy. Talking about how they're basically wanting to scare the American people. Obviously, it's a holiday, but I'm going to get some of my writers together tomorrow to do a new article and repost at Infowars.com on the front page, all the different senators admitting it was Obama that demanded the indefinite detention, admitting that it is indefinite detention. And then I'm going to show you where Obama got him and said he was against all this. That is duplicitous. That is deceptive. That is counting on people not paying attention. Go to Infowars.com, get our articles, get them out to people, and point out that here's Obama in his signing statement today saying, I don't like it that it's for citizens, but I'm going to sign it anyways, when he's the one that demanded it. I mean, wow. How do you deal with this level of deception and disinformation. They're doing this because they're getting ready to devalue the dollar and fully implode the country. And I bought The Economist today when I was at the grocery store, Economist magazine, and it says central bankers to the rescue, and shows a central banker with defibrillators about to restart the heart of a patient. They've designed this implosion to consolidate power. Every time things get worse, they get more power. Then it gets worse, they get more power. When the IMF and World Bank documents are public, how they plan to take over the U.S. and Europe and bankrupt it through derivatives. Things are going well for them. They're not screwing things up. When Hitler was invading France, things were going well. That wasn't a screw up. They're taking over. They're destroying and overthrowing the republic. He said, this bill does go against our cherished values, but I'm still signing it. That's a quote in there. Go read a signing statement. Our cherished values. No, not our values, our law. Our law, you tyrant. But remember, the office is being turned into a dictatorship for the bureaucracy. The president himself's a teleprompter reading nobody. This is going to be handed on to future puppets. All right, hope you're having a great new year. Please get this out to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. We've got to stand together or hang separate.
Friday afternoon, and since that time, now the measure has been virtually ignored by the mainstream media. Now, the order essentially gives the President of the United States absolute power over any and all American resources during both times of peace and national crisis. Now, this includes, but is not limited to, food and livestock, water, plants, energy, health resources, transportation, and construction materials, and gives the government the ability to, quote, control the general distribution of any material, including applicable services in the civilian market. Now, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney laughed off a question about the document at today's briefing. Let's take a look.
There's been some online commentary suggesting this gives the executive branch power to allocate energy, food, water in either peacetime or wartime. And there are some conservative blogs that are pushing the notion that this suggests the White House is preparing for a war with Iran. Can you explain what this executive order was?
Well, I cannot explain that reaction to it. I think it was a fairly standard and routine piece of business.
Now, not everybody's laughing about this executive order. In fact, some have suggested this would give the President of the United States the authority to declare basically martial law during times of peace. And to be sure, this is simply the latest string of actions taken by the administration that ignore the basic principles of our Constitution. Joining me now.
Hi, everybody. Today is August 1st, 2014. Obama signs executive order to detain Americans with respiratory illnesses. As the Ebola outbreak continues to cause concern based upon the recommendation of the Secretary of Health and Human Services in consultation with the acting Surgeon General, President Barack Obama has signed an amendment to an executive order that will allow him to mandate the apprehension and detention of Americans who merely show signs of respiratory illness. The executive order, now this was signed yesterday, titled Revised List of Quarantinable Communicable Diseases, amends Executive Order 13295 passed by George W. Bush in 2003, which allows for the apprehension, detention, or conditional release of individuals to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of suspected communicable diseases. The amendment signed by Obama replaces subsection B of the original Bush executive order, which referred only to SARS. Obama's amendment allows for the detention of Americans who display severe acute respiratory syndrome, which are diseases that are associated with fever and signs and symptoms of pneumonia or other respiratory illnesses, are capable of being transmitted from person to person, and that either are causing or have the potential to cause a pandemic or, upon infection, are highly likely to cause mortality or serious morbidity if not properly controlled. Although Ebola was listed on the original executive order signed by Bush, Obama's amendment ensures that medical authorities can forcibly detain Americans who merely show signs of respiratory illness, with the exception of influenza. Although the quarantining of people suspected of being infected with the Ebola virus seems like a perfectly logical move, the actual preconditions for this to happen aren't restricted to just those suffering from the disease. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has measures in place for dealing with an outbreak of a communicable disease, which allows for the quarantine of well persons who do not show symptoms of the disease. In addition, under the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act, public health authorities and governors would be given expanded police powers to seize control of communication devices, public and private property, as well as a host of other draconian measures in the event of a public health emergency. When the legislation was introduced, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons warned that it could turn governors into dictators. Yesterday, it was reported that Emory University Hospital in Atlanta was set to receive a patient infected with Ebola. But there is 2, actually maybe 3, that are being transported. Who knows where they're going. A hospital in Germany also accepted an infected patient earlier this week. Some critics have raised concerns about the risk of deliberately importing infected individuals into the West. Yeah, do you really trust the government? I mean, look what they've done with past disasters. You know, Hurricane Sandy, Katrina, and then more recently, the anthrax, the total cluster, you know what, mess up with the anthrax that was released there at the CDC. And it was a live virus.
Maybe Mr. Lazarus knows better than I do how many bombs the president has to drop without congressional authorization before that becomes war. I don't know the actual number. But I think what Mr. King was getting at is, you know, there is one last thing to which the people can resort if the government does not respect the restraints that the Constitution places on the government. Abraham Lincoln talked about our right to alter our government, or a revolutionary right to overthrow it. And that is certainly something that no one wants to contemplate. But as I mentioned in my written and my delivered testimony, if the people come to believe that the government is no longer constrained by the laws, then they will conclude that neither are they. That is why this is a very, very dangerous sort of thing for the president to do, to wantonly ignore the laws, to try to impose obligations on people that the legislature did not approve, etc.
An excellent conclusion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.